In this video, I would like to address the question of why Jordan Peterson is accused of having right-wing views or even far right-wing views. I'm going to draw on a single video of Peterson's as source material. Obviously, there's probably hundreds of videos that I could have drawn on and writings and print interviews and all sorts of things. But I've decided to concentrate on a single video for two reasons. One, it will be easy for people to verify that he really did say what I claim that he said. And secondly, if I drew one sentence from here and one sentence from here and one sentence from here, I think I could be accused of cherry picking. People could say, well, you've taken that sentence out of context. You know, he probably said 100 sentences that contradict the sentence that you've said, and he just chose his words poorly, and you've taken that one and that one and that one, and you've stitched them all together to sort of give a false impression of what he believes. So instead of doing that, I'm going to go for one specific video. So this video is primarily about the pill, that is the birth control pill, or really more broadly about the fact that women can have sex and not have children. They can choose not to have children while still being sexually active. In practice, that's what Peterson is talking about, although he does say the pill. He states that the pill has led to the birth rate in, quote, the West, unquote, being below replacement levels, which might, quote, do us in, unquote, and is at least, quote, a catastrophe, unquote. And I'm quoting his exact words there, obviously, so that I can't be accused of misrepresenting him. He adds that, quote, no one can talk about that, unquote, because of, quote, egalitarianism and diversity and all of that, unquote. So the question that I would ask at this point is, what does Peterson mean by the West? So by the West, Peterson is clearly referring to something which can be destroyed by low birth rates. You can't destroy a philosophical or political tradition with low birth rates. You also can't destroy a people with low birth rates if that people can recruit new members from outside itself. The West, if we simply take the West as meaning the population of the developed world, well, clearly we can recruit new members from outside ourselves. In fact, we have to make efforts to stop recruiting people. The governments of the Western world don't go out to Asia and Africa and beg people, please come live in the West. On the contrary, there's many more people who want to come than the governments of the developed world want to let in. The efforts that they take are to limit recruiting new people. So Peterson can't simply mean the inhabitants of the West. Despite the fantasies of the far right and a small minority of people that, you know, do cause problems, immigrants to the West have adopted Western culture. And I don't want to argue this in too great detail because I think it's fairly self-evident, but you can simply look at, for example, it would be quite normal in England for Rishi Sunak, a government minister, to issue a particular policy, and then Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, to denounce that policy because Rishi Sunak is a conservative and Sadiq Khan is a member of the Labour Party, and those being the two major parties in the United Kingdom. And the whole exchange is entirely the same as if it had been John Smith and Bill Brown announcing a policy and denouncing it. Both of those men are the children of immigrants, but there's no obvious sense in which that matters to what's happening at all. They seem to have both adopted Western cultures. One of them's become a conservative, one of them's become a sort of centre-left member of the Labour Party, and they're arguing with each other just as, you know, anyone else from the Conservative and Labour Party would be arguing with each other. So perhaps Peterson means the inhabitants of the West that are not the children of immigrants. And I'd like to suggest that that seems to be the explanation that makes the most sense, because that's the thing that can be destroyed by low birth rates. It could easily be the case that white people, you know, whatever name you want to use, but let's say white people, that's probably the colloquial term. White people as a body choose not to have children sufficient to replace the loss of older generations. And I believe that that is the case in some places, and population is declining, and therefore the West needs to bring in immigrants in order to maintain population levels. That would be a catastrophe if you think that the West is defined biologically rather than defined culturally. If you believe that members of other races who come to the West and adopt Western culture are not us, but are replacing us, then Peterson's statement that this is a catastrophe, this might do us in, you can't talk about it because of egalitarianism and diversity and all of that, that all makes sense. If you assume that the West means anything else, well, it's difficult to see, I can't see an explanation in which his statement makes sense. So if I could summarise Peterson's apparent views, the West is a race, not a culture. Immigrants to the West will never be part of the West, and on the contrary, they are the destruction of the West. And finally, women's access to contraception, or more broadly, women's ability to choose whether they will have children and when they will have children and how many children they will have, is aiding the destruction of the West. Those are broadly the core ideas of the far right. Those are the core ideas of the alt-right or neo-Nazis or whatever you want to call them. So I would suggest that the answer is, fundamentally, Jordan Peterson is accused of having right-wing or far-right views because Jordan Peterson has far-right views. I would like to end with a message to any admirers of Jordan Peterson who might want to post saying how terrible and wrong I am and how I've got Peterson completely wrong, and how Peterson's not a racist, and how I'm part of the postmodern neo-Marxist effort to smear him, etc., etc. Because I have expressed this view online and I have gotten a lot of pushback from it, and I've noticed that the pushback seems to be very non-specific. They say, you are wrong, Peterson doesn't believe this, you're trying to smear him, you're a typical leftist, etc., etc. But they don't get down to details. They don't say, you said that Peterson said X and he didn't say X. Or you have looked at a thing that Peterson said and you've concluded that that must mean this, but it doesn't mean this. In other words, they give me the conclusion, but they don't give me any chain of reasoning where they've looked at anything that I've said and found a flaw in it. It seems to be just that they've rejected the conclusion. So if you are going to comment, please do comment. I don't turn off comments or anything like that. I won't delete your comment, but I will ask you, what have I claimed that Peterson said that he didn't say? Or what inference have I drawn from something that Peterson said that isn't a valid inference? What logical claim have I made that is illogical? Where is my argument wrong? Don't just tell me that my argument is wrong. Tell me where it's wrong. Because if you don't do that, I will assume that you haven't listened to my argument and that you've just rejected the conclusion without thinking about the argument as such.